So this is part 2 of the FACIT 4000 paper tape punch restoration. As you can see, I've been stripping the unit right down. I've removed the punch, I've removed most of the hardware, I've removed all the electronics. The biggest part of stripping it down so far has been removal of the sound deadening foam. If you've ever come across this, then no doubt you're aware that it's fairly horrible stuff to remove, and once it gets fairly old it just starts to crumble and dissolve, and removing the foam itself is fairly easy, but the adhesive backing is quite tricky to get off. I think they make it out of the same stuff that they glue needles to pine trees with. It gets everywhere and is very hard to remove. I've actually found the easiest way to remove that is to rub all the soft foam off the outside, then use something like a sticker or label remover, give it a good drenching and leave it for 10-15 minutes, and then the adhesive backing turns into a sticky goo that you can just wipe off, and then it's just a case of cleaning up the residue. So the way I go about restorations normally, especially mechanical devices like this, is I take off all the bits that I will need to look at and possibly repair. I then end up usually with something like this, which is just the chassis with any bits left on it that I don't see a particular need to remove. That's what I've done here. There's just a few parts left to come off this. What I did find once I'd taken the platter off was there were lots of bits floating around in here, magnets and springs and linkages, and I don't have a manual for this, so I've kind of guessed as to where they all go, and it just seemed to be working in a way that I would expect. You've got the lever here for the paper out indicator, and then you've got the tensioning arm here. There's a roller missing that I'll have to replace. A couple of rollers here that I haven't taken off, they just weren't there. I'll have to make some for that. On the underside, what I intend to do is test all the parts that are in here. There's a cooling motor, which I'll test all the capacitors and rectifier to make sure they're all okay. It's already fairly clean, but I've given it a bit more of a clean up, so it's actually come out quite nice. As I said before, it doesn't seem to have had a huge amount of use, but we'll get a better indication of that when we look at the punch head. And this is a need too. I won't be taking any of these parts out. I will test the motor, make sure it runs okay. I'll test all the connections. But the next job I want to do is on the rear panel. This panel has all the fuse holders and mains connectors and switches, and what seems to have happened is that, I'm not sure what this is for, it's kind of a huge kind of thumb screw bolt. I've got no idea why it's there. I'm not really sure what it's for, because it's not actually connected electrically to the back panel, so it's not a grounding strap connector. But what seems to have happened is in shipping it's been obviously impacted, it's bent up the rear panel, so I'll take this rear panel off and then get it into the workshop and see if I can get it straightened out. So as far as that will go, so it looks like it's captive. I'm assuming, so I've never worked on one of these before, so I'm kind of making this up as I go along. I assume these are the screws that hold the rear panel in place. Unfortunately the wires are too short to allow me to pull it off that way. Okay, so I'm going to need to unsolder some wires here, so I'll get the rear panel taken off and then get back on camera. Right, so I have the rear panel removed. Required the removal of quite a surprising number of screws. But luckily I was able to get it removed without having to desolder anything. You can take the screws out and then manipulate the various fittings through the holes in the panel. So that's a bonus. It'll save me a lot of messing about, having to figure out where each wire connects back to. Having said that, I do take photographs before I take it apart and draw diagrams as to how it's wired up. So this is now a case of figuring out the best way to get this straight again without taking the paint off. It is a lot more badly dented than I thought, but I'll see what I can do. I still have no idea what this is for, so if anyone knows why this is attached to the rear panel, then please let me know. I doubt I will refit it. It might come in handy for another project somewhere, but I have no idea why it's on here, unless it's to secure it to a bench or something, or if there's an accessory that's used to clamp it to the back. As I say, I mean, it could be a ground strap, but yeah, I don't know. If anyone knows what it's for, then please let me know. Right, I'll go and see if I can get this thing straightened out. Okay, so back from the workshop. I've got the rear panel straightened out. It's as good as I can get it without marking up the paintwork. There's still a few very minor imperfections in it, but if I try to get these out by applying more pressure, then it's going to damage the paint, and it will look worse than having these slight bumps in it. Also, once I've refitted the various parts, then they shouldn't show up. So this is now ready to go back on, but before I do that, I want to go over the rest of the chassis. To give you an idea of the sorts of testing that I do, we have a small motor, so I want to make sure this works before starting to reassemble anything, and obviously the easiest way is to apply some power to it. I don't know exactly what the spec is for this motor, but it appears to be connected to a 12 volt rail, so I'm just going to try it on 5 volts here. I've tested it with a meter and there doesn't appear to be any protection diodes built into it, so let's give it a go and see what happens. Okay, so it's a bit noisy, so what I'll probably do is take that out and lubricate the bearings, and that should quiet it down a fair bit. Obviously it's far easier doing that at this stage than waiting until the whole thing's been reassembled to find out that it's got a noisy fan. So this may appear to be doing things backwards and not getting the big items working first, but generally the approach that I take is that I will get the other parts working. Electronics normally are the easy bit to get working. Famous last words, I hope I don't regret saying that. But also things such as capacitors, I can test those now to a certain degree. I won't test them for leakage at this point. I do have a high voltage capacitor tester where I could test the leakage, but I won't do that right now. I just want to do a basic check to see if they are functional. Okay, so we're showing 100N, and that is what the capacitor is rated at. Just a low voltage leakage test. It's not showing any leakage at all, and I'll do that with the other components on here. There's another capacitor up here I want to check. I will need to disconnect one of the leads to do a proper test on that. But that's the approach I take. I'll go through the entire chassis, I'll test everything, I'll test the bridge rectifier to make sure that's functional and that all the diodes in it are not open or short. I'll get the rear panel put back on, and then I can do an initial power up with no boards in it and just make sure that the basic power supply works and that there aren't any issues that need addressing before I start to reassemble the rest of the components. Okay, so that's the rear panel refitted, all the parts reassembled, and the damage that was there has completely disappeared. It's not visible at all, even on close inspection, so I would consider that a successful repair. I've been through the rest of the chassis, checked all the parts that I can while I've got it in this state. I've had to straighten a few other parts. Some are quite surprising in the nature of the damage. In particular, these catches. These are the catches that hold the front cover up, and I found that I would have expected them to be damaged if they were by being bent sideways, but this particular one was bent in a way that was quite surprising. I've taken some close-up photographs, and as you can see, the damage was quite significant, and when I strained it out on the press, it took just over 1.5 tons to strain that out, so I'm not quite sure how they managed to do that without destroying the casting, but either way they're now both straight and operate the way they should. They're on eccentric, so I'll adjust those once the front cover's back on. So as I say, I've been through the rest of the chassis. All the parts are, as far as I can tell, now straight and in the right place, except for the tape feed. I've put this back together as best as I can. As I said, I don't have a manual for this, so I'm having to kind of guess as to where some of the various parts go. It had a fairly rough trip over here, so a lot of these parts were just rattling loose inside here. I need to drill and tap the end of this arm to take a new roller. I need to make a small bracket here to accept 2 new rollers, and then I need to make the rollers themselves. So this is what I'll do on the next video. I'll get the tape feed mechanism up and working, and then once I've done that, I'll move on and start looking at the punch head itself.